The Black Ninja 3. Copyright Asa Milila, all rights reserved. The moon, rounder and brighter than a freshly caught tuna and twice as shiny, hung in the inky sky, casting an almost suspiciously perfect spotlight on Midnight, the Black Ninja. He perched atop the highest point of the Whispering Reef, which, tonight, wasn't whispering so much as humming. A very strange, slightly off-key hum, like 1,000 tiny kazoos being played by very enthusiastic but very untalented sea snails. Midnight's whiskers twitched. This was no ordinary ocean sound. This was musical, and not in a good way. It was the kind of melody that made your fur stand on end, your ears want to hide behind your head, and your stomach churn with a queasy mix of confusion and mild seasickness. Old Man Barnacle, somehow even more ancient and covered in barnacles than before. He now had a small colony of barnacles living on his shell, complete with tiny barnacle-sized hammocks, scuttled up to Midnight, his shell creaking like a rusty hinge that hadn't been oiled since the dawn of time. Midnight! Oh, Midnight! The sea is singing, and not in a good way. It sounds like a choir of constipated whales gargling with gravel while trying to yodel. It's an auditory assault, a symphony of suffering, a really bad karaoke night. Midnight winced. He knew exactly what Old Man Barnacle meant. The humming was growing louder, more insistent, and definitely more off-key. It was the kind of melody that made you question the very fabric of reality, and made you wonder if maybe, just maybe, the world would be a better place if everyone just communicated through interpretive dance. "What's causing it, Old Man Barnacle?" Midnight asked, his voice a low rumble, though it was almost drowned out by a particularly loud BM from the distance, a sound that could only be described as a whale attempting to play the trumpet after a very large meal. They say it's the Siren song," the crab wailed, waving his claws in a panic that sent several of his bottle cap collection flying. One landed with a plink on Midnight's head, followed by another that bounced off his nose. A legendary melody, so beautiful and so terrible it can control the very ocean. And they say it's being played on a giant enchanted kazoo. Midnight blinked. A giant enchanted kazoo? This was going to be a weird one. He'd faced giant squids, grumpy pufferfish, and even a particularly aggressive swarm of self-folding laundry. But a giant kazoo? This was uncharted territory in the realm of bizarre villainy. Who would dare to play such a thing? Midnight muttered, mostly to himself, but Old Man Barnacle heard him anyway, his hearing surprisingly good for a crab who was older than most of the coral reefs. They say it's the Maestro of mayhem," the crab whispered, his voice trembling like a jellyfish in a storm, a very small, very frightened jellyfish. "A villain of terrible taste and even worse musical talent. He wants to use the Siren song to force the entire ocean to participate in a synchronized swimming routine. Forever. He wants every fish, every crab, every sea slug, even the normally grumpy anglerfish, to perform a meticulously choreographed water ballet, complete with synchronized fin movements and coordinated bubble blowing." Midnight's eyes widened. This was a catastrophe of epic proportions. Not only was the ocean's natural rhythm being disrupted, but the thought of every single fish, crab, and sea slug being forced to do the backstroke in unison, wearing tiny sequin swim caps, was horrifying. It was a fate worse than ending up as the main course at a shark's birthday party. "I will stop him," Midnight declared, his voice firm, even though the humming was making his head throb, and he was starting to develop a nervous twitch in his left ear. "I will find the Maestro of mayhem, silence the Siren's song, and save the ocean from a lifetime of aquatic aerobics and the tyranny of terrible tunes." Old Man Barnacle looked at Midnight with a mixture of awe and terror, mostly terror. "Be careful, Midnight," he squeaked, his voice cracking like an old barnacle, which, to be fair, he was. "The Maestro's lair is said to be hidden in the Bermuda Triangle of bad vibes, a place where compasses spin wildly, good taste goes to die, and they say it's guarded by an army of tone-deaf barnacles." Midnight shuddered. Tone-deaf barnacles? That was even worse than the kazoo. He imagined an endless chorus of off-key clicks and clacks, a symphony of sonic suffering that could drive even the most stoic sea cucumber to madness. With a determined leap, and a silent prayer for noise-canceling earplugs, and maybe a strong cup of kelp tea, Midnight plunged into the strangely musical ocean. The water was vibrating with the force of the siren's song, making it feel like he was swimming through a giant, slightly fizzy and very off-key soda. It was like being inside a giant underwater jukebox that only played one very, very bad song. Schools of fish with scales that shimmered in protest, looking seasick and slightly green around the gills, swam past. Giant kelp forests swayed and writhed, as if trying to dance to the awful music, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, like they were having a very bad seaweed seizure. Even the normally stoic sea turtles looked like they had massive headaches and were holding their flippers to their ears in distress. As midnight swam deeper, the humming grew louder, more chaotic, and even more experimental. He passed through bizarre underwater landscapes, coral reefs shaped like giant musical notes, some of which were suspiciously flat, clamshells that opened and closed in time with the rhythm, and occasionally snapped at him with surprising ferocity, and a field of sea anemones that looked like they were conducting a very out-of-tune orchestra, their tentacles waving wildly and erratically. Suddenly, glurp, a shimmering, iridescent bubble the size of a small submarine enveloped him. He struggled, but the bubble was strong, sticky, and smelled faintly of stale popcorn and regret? Well, 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 what have we here? A voice boomed, echoing strangely within the bubble, like it was coming from a very large, very confused, and slightly echoey microphone. From behind a giant, kelp-draped rock, which was swaying rhythmically to the awful music, emerged a figure that could only be the Maestro of Mayhem. He was an even more bizarre creature than Midnight had imagined. He had the upper body of a flamboyant octopus, dressed in a sequin tuxedo that was several sizes too small and looked like it had been attacked by a glitter cannon, and the lower body of a... Well, it was hard to tell, but it seemed to involve a lot of tentacles, a small, wheeled platform that kept getting stuck on the coral, and possibly a pair of mismatched flippers. And in his many arms, he held the source of the terrible music, a giant golden kazoo, encrusted with what looked suspiciously like rhinestones, and a few stray bits of seaweed. "I am Midnight, the Black Ninja," Midnight declared, trying to sound imposing, but his voice came out sounding like a muffled squeak inside the bubble, like a tiny, trapped squeak toy. "Ah, the Black Ninja! I've heard of you!" the Maestro cackled, twirling his tentacles dramatically, nearly knocking over a carefully arranged display of glowing sea sponges. "They say you're very quiet. A pity you can't appreciate my musical genius. Behold the Kazoo of Krakatoa. With it, I shall reshape the ocean in my own rhythmic image. I will turn this chaotic, unstructured mess into a symphony of synchronized swimming, a ballet of bubble blowing, a watery Woodstock, but with more tentacles and less tie-dye." He blew another blast on the kazoo, and the bubble around Midnight vibrated so hard he thought his teeth would fall out, and his fillings would start tap dancing. Midnight knew he had to escape. He remembered a trick Master Owl had taught him, the sonic subterfuge maneuver. It involved a complex series of purrs, clicks, and hisses designed to disrupt sound waves and generally confuse anyone within a 5-mile radius. He focused all his energy, took a deep breath and a silent apology to his eardrums and everyone else's within earshot, and unleashed the most bizarre, ear-splitting, and utterly confusing series of noises he had ever made. It was a sound that could only be described as a cat trying to play the bagpipes while having a sneezing fit, while simultaneously gargling with gravel. The bubble around him shimmered, wobbled, and then... pop! It burst with a loud, wet, and slightly smelly explosion, leaving the Maestro sputtering, clutching his many ears, and looking utterly bewildered. "What? What was that unholy racket?" the Maestro shrieked, his tentacles flailing wildly, knocking over his carefully arranged display of glowing sea sponges, which then proceeded to bounce around the room like bioluminescent bowling balls. Midnight leaped forward, but the Maestro was surprisingly agile for a creature with so many limbs and a small, unstable wheeled platform. He dodged and weaved, blowing blasts of the Siren's song from the Kazoo of Krakatoa, each one more painful than the last. It was like being attacked by a musical weapon of mass destruction. "You cannot stop me, little cat," the Maestro screeched, his voice echoing through the water, sounding like a rusty foghorn played through a broken speaker. "The ocean will dance to my tune, and you will be my star. my star of the synchronized swimming team. You will be the feline figure skater of the sea." Midnight knew he had to use all his ninja skills, his cunning, his courage, and a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated improvisation. He used the coral climb technique to leap onto a passing giant clam, which promptly tried to eat him, then the silent pounce to land behind the Maestro, who was too busy admiring his reflection in a passing school of shiny fish to notice, and the fish flip maneuver to distract him with a well-aimed school of bioluminescent shrimp who were surprisingly good at synchronized swimming, even without the Maestro's influence. But the Maestro was too determined and also surprisingly slippery. He spun around, his tentacles flailing, and managed to grab Midnight with one of his sticky appendages. "Gotcha," he roared, holding Midnight aloft, like a particularly furry and indignant trophy. "Now, you will listen to my masterpiece, up close and personal. You will experience the full, unadulterated glory of the Kazoo of Krakatoa." He raised the Kazoo of Krakatoa to Midnight's ear and took a deep breath, his cheeks puffing out like a pair of overinflated balloons. Midnight knew this was it. He had to do something, anything, before his eardrums staged a full-scale revolt, and he was forced to spend the rest of his days communicating through interpretive dance. He remembered Master Owl's words: "The greatest weapon of a ninja is not their claws or speed, it is their heart, and also a good knowledge of musical theory and a pair of industrial-strength earplugs." He looked at the Kazoo of Krakatoa. It was large, golden, and covered in rhinestones, some of which were starting to fall off. But Midnight noticed something else, a small, almost hidden valve near the mouthpiece, a valve that looked suspiciously like it was being held together with a piece of seaweed and a paperclip. With a desperate burst of energy, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer terror of what was about to happen to his ears, Midnight reached out with his paw and tweaked the valve. The Kazoo of Krakatoa sputtered, coughed, wheezed, and then let out a sound that was less a melody and more of a strangled squawk, like a dying walrus trying to sing opera. The Siren song was silenced. The awful music stopped. The ocean breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Maestro of Mayhem stared at the Kazoo in horror, his tentacles drooping like deflated balloons. What did you do? My masterpiece! My magnum opus of musical mayhem, my ticket to becoming the world's greatest and only underwater conductor. Midnight, free from the Maestro's grasp, landed gracefully, if slightly shakily on the ocean floor. "I believe I just detuned your instrument," he said, trying to sound nonchalant, even though his ears were still ringing, and he felt a strange vibration in his whiskers. The Maestro slumped in defeat, his tentacles drooping even further. Without the Siren's song, his power was gone. His dreams of aquatic aerobics domination shattered. The ocean began to calm. The fish stopped looking seasick, the kelp forests stopped dancing, and started swaying gently, like they were enjoying a nice, relaxing breeze, and the sea turtles finally stopped clutching their heads and started doing the backstroke in a normal, non-synchronized way. Suddenly, a group of very angry-looking, very tone-deaf barnacles appeared surrounding the Maestro. They were holding tiny, makeshift instruments, seashells that sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard, coral fragments that produced a noise akin to a dying cat, and even a small, discarded tin can that someone was banging on with a tiny crab claw. You ruined our concert," one of them squeaked, holding up a particularly off-key conch shell. "We were finally going to have our big break." Another one complained, banging his tiny drum made of a hollowed-out pebble with a rhythmic but incredibly unpleasant clank. The Maestro looked around at the menacing barnacles, his many eyes widening in fear. No, please, not the tone-deaf barnacles. Anything but the tone-deaf barnacles. I'd rather face 1,000 grumpy pufferfish than endure another minute of their music." The barnacles advanced, their tiny instruments raised, and the last thing Midnight heard before swimming away was a cacophony of truly awful music, a sound that would haunt his dreams and his ears for weeks to come. Midnight returned to the Whispering Reef, where Old Man Barnacle and the villagers were waiting for him. They cheered his return, their voices sounding like a beautiful symphony compared to the Siren's song. A beautiful symphony played by a full orchestra of singing dolphins and harmonizing starfish. "You saved us, Midnight," they cried. their voices filled with gratitude and relief. "You silenced the Siren's song. You defeated the Maestro of mayhem. You saved us from a lifetime of synchronized swimming and the tyranny of terrible tunes. You are a true hero." Midnight smiled a genuine smile that reached all the way to his whiskers and made his tail twitch with pride. He was glad the ocean was safe, even if it meant facing a giant enchanted Kazoo, an army of tone-deaf barnacles, and the lingering echo of that awful, awful music. From that day on, Midnight was known not only as the Black Ninja, the hero of the deep blue, and the bane of the bubblegum bubbles, but also as the silencer of the Siren's song, the defeater of the detuned, the maestro of musical mitigation, and the cat with the surprisingly good ear for musical theory, and an even better tolerance for really, really bad music. And though he still loved napping in sunbeams, chasing after sardines, and occasionally conducting his own, much more tuneful, orchestra of singing clams, he was always ready for his next adventure. His heart filled with the courage of a true ninja, his ears always on the alert for any sign of a rogue Kazoo, and his pouch always stocked with a pair of industrial-strength, noise-canceling earplugs.